Hello, it's Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about my travels across Michigan and all the way to southeast Kansas this week, answer a question I was asked over this past week, plus review the first growth stages of corn and finally share a few thoughts on corn nitrogen needs. So, in my travels across Michigan this week, I found everything from farmers nearly done with planting to others just getting started. On traveling to Kansas to visit my youngest son, I was amazed to find most all of Illinois, up and down I 55, was already planted. And in the southern two-thirds of Illinois and into Missouri, it was easy to already row the corn from the highway. I saw wheat in southeast Kansas that was starting to head out, but also way too much water in the fields down there. That same storm is the one that later made its way to Michigan has kind of since slowed down what has been probably the fastest early planting season Michigan has seen in years. So I got an interesting question this week. The question was whether or not we should have stopped planting prior to that cold spell we had midweek to avoid shocking that freshly planted seed and causing some emergence problems. Now we have had situations in the past where pausing planting was warranted, but luckily this was not one of them. Usually, the problem occurs when we have a cold, wet rain within the first 24 to 36 hours after planting. That first cold drink of water can actually shock freshly germinating plants, and that'll negatively affect that germination. Now, in this past week's case, the cold came while the soils were still pretty dry, and even though the air temperatures got down into the 30s, the soil temperatures remained at or above that 50-degree mark throughout the week. So therefore, really no pause rather in planting was warranted this week. Now, if you do have questions, always feel free to give me a call, and those questions, they might just get highlighted on a future edition of the Focus Friday podcast. So, what about all the seed we just put in the ground? Remember that at soil temperatures above 50 degrees, this seed will start imbibing water within that first 24 to 36 hours if planted into the moisture. Now, we know that corn, it requires about 100 growing degree days to emerge. So, to calculate growing degree days, you need to first record what we call the mean temperature. Now, this can be done by simply adding together the high and the low temperature for the day and then dividing that value by 2. Now, if the mean temperature is at or below the base temperature, now, of course, for corn development, that's 50 degrees, then the growing degree value is 0. But if the mean temperature is above the base temperature, then the growing degree day units equals the value of the mean temperature minus that base 50 temperature. Now, if the low temperature of that day is below 50, then we just use 50 degrees for your calculation. So let's go through an example just to clarify that. So let's say your average or your actual high temperature for the day is 80 degrees and your actual low temperature is 60 degrees. And we, of course, using the 50-degree base temperature for corn. Now, we'd figure that mean temperature by taking the 80 degrees, add the 60 degrees, and then divide that number by 2. In this case, it gives us 70. Then we take that 70, subtract off the 50 base, and it gives us a 20-degree heat unit accumulation for that day. Then we just add those up and accumulate them every day. Now, some very early planted corn has already collected more than that 100-degree day units, and that started to emerge. But truly, the majority of our corn crop out there, it's still collecting these heat units and should emerge upon hitting that threshold. So, finally, let's have a quick talk about nitrogen and those applications to our corn crop this year. From now through that early V5 growth stage, our corn really is not using a whole lot of nitrogen. But from V6 to V14, boy, our corn crop, it's going to need nearly 50% of its total nitrogen available for that growth stage. And so, as we continue to look at that development, it's going to take nearly another 25% through R1. And then finally, it's going to need that last 25% to get it through black layer. So, as we think about that, we need to really plan to feed that corn successfully all the way through the growing season. One of the worst things we can do is let it run out of nitrogen at the end of the growing season. So let's start planning now for how we're going to be successful there. So as we wrap up this week's Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast, be sure to start scouting those fields for emergence, especially after you accumulate those 100 heat units. Let's look for emergence uniformity and any potential problems that might cause a replant conversation. Knowing that, what kind of stand we've got to start with, that's the first step in determining the success of this crop for the rest of the year. So this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great week.